So before we embark on a couple-hour discussion about disasters and the decision-making during them, we have a speaker from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, known colloquially as HUD. And so I'm delighted to introduce Harriet Tregoning, who is the director of HUD's Office of Economic Resilience. Her office helps cities, counties, and towns across the country build a strong foundation for a diverse and prosperous economy based on enhancing community, quality of place, economic opportunity, fiscal stability, transportation choice, and affordability. So exactly along the lines of what Dr. Rossi was mentioning. She's new to this job, and until very recently was the director of the DC Office of Planning, where she worked to make DC a walkable, bikeable, eminently livable, globally competitive, and sustainable city. Her priorities have included rewriting the city's zoning code for the first time in 50 years. And also, if you've ever gotten on a Capital Bike Share bike, you know who to thank now. She co-founded with the former Maryland Governor Glendening the Smart Growth Leadership Institute. She served on served under Governor Glendening as the Secretary of Planning and then as the nation's first state-level cabinet secretary for smart growth. Before marrying her name with the Maryland government, Tregoning was Director of Development, Community, and Environment at the United States Environmental Protection Agency. And I think maybe joining her for the Q&A part of this talk is Tricia Miller? Yeah? Okay. Who is a Senior Advisor in the Office of Sustainable Housing and Communities. So I'm sure they both will have fascinating insights into the nexus of socioeconomic status, housing, and climate change. Thanks.
Good morning, everyone. How are you? Thank you so much for having me here today. I'm really happy to be with a group of people who are so dedicated to the important work of resilience. And I'm really honored to be representing Secretary Donovan and HUD. We're very proud of the work that we're doing, and we want to be working with you to create more of a culture of resilience in America. I don't know about you, but I was kind of surprised that HUD was so involved in disaster recovery before I came to the agency. How many of you knew the big role that HUD has played? Since 2000, HUD's been appropriated almost $48 billion in long-term disaster recovery. That's with a B. You know, in some years, the money that comes through the Community Development Block Grant Program to go out to communities is more than the appropriations for the normal block grant program in that year. So it's a lot of money, you know, communities are very grateful to get it. But part of the question is, you know, what are communities really doing to prepare for the disaster that's coming, and how are they using that enormous influx of funds to really make their community better off long-term and more resilient, not just to recover from the last disaster, but to really prepare for all the future shocks and events that are headed their way in the future. So we have a long way to go, not just in communities, but everywhere, to confront the threat that climate change poses for us. As you know, just a few weeks ago, the administration released its third national climate assessment. For many of you, that information was not in any way groundbreaking. You already know that sea level rise is contributing very much to a threatened set of coastal communities. Climate change is causing natural disasters to be more severe and affect more Americans. In the past 3 decades, the percentage of people with asthma has more than doubled, and climate change is putting those Americans at greater risk of landing in the hospital. Droughts, which you know can devastate local communities and their economies and drive up everyone's food prices, are becoming more frequent and more severe in the western part of the country. And no matter what some may say, man-made activity is contributing to these worsening conditions. In short, climate change is having a negative effect on Americans every single day, and we really have to act now. While the information in the National Climate Assessment is alarming, the good news is that President Obama and this administration have been taking unprecedented steps to reduce the threat of climate change and to mitigate its effects. Last summer, President Obama laid out his climate action plan. This is an extraordinary vision from a U.S. president for how we can effectively deal with the challenges climate change is presenting to our country and the world. The 3 tenets of the Climate Action Plan are, number 1, to reduce the levels of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases released through a series of administrative actions aimed at power plants and other key mitigation actions. lead the international effort to reduce and prepare for climate change, and prepare the nation for the effects of climate change through adaptation and resilience activities. And that's today what I'd like to focus on, what we're already doing domestically to achieve these ambitious goals. It's been kind of a big week for climate change, right? On Monday, the Environmental Protection Agency released their new rules on carbon emissions, very exciting. The administration has already made progress by moving to cleaner sources of energy and improving energy efficiency for cars and trucks. But these new carbon standards for power plants are really going to have an enormous impact, protecting public health and welfare. And let's be clear, the way that these things are being proposed to roll out are not burdensome regulations. They give states unbelievable flexibility to meet them by using energy sources that work best for each state. And these new standards are going to have very long-lasting effects. By modernizing our power plants, we're going to continue progress in cutting carbon pollution, but also spark homegrown clean energy innovation to create jobs and lower energy waste that will save every household money. I'm going to come back to the topic in a bit of innovation, because I think that really is what we need to be seeing. Much more innovation across almost every sector to address the challenges that we're facing. We know that entrenched special interests and their allies in Congress are going to make doomsday claims about killing jobs and hurting the economy, but they've made those claims. Every single time we've set clear rules and better standards for our air and our water and our children's health, and every time they've been wrong. The fact is that EPA's new standards are going to be good for the atmosphere, good for the climate, good for the health of children in this generation and for generations to come. It's not just EPA, though, that can make a difference in reducing our carbon footprint. Agencies across the federal government are working to meet the goals of the President's Climate Action Plan. At HUD, we're working to reduce the effects of climate change while also building the future. That's why we've also taken significant steps to reduce carbon emissions. You probably know that nearly 40% of total carbon dioxide emissions in the U.S. come from energy use in buildings. Increasing the energy efficiency of every residential building by just 10% would be the carbon equivalent of taking 18 million cars off the road each year. That's why we are part of the Better Buildings Challenge, an effort with the Department of Energy and many other partners that is setting new standards for our buildings, and in our case, for public housing. We've recently extended the Better Buildings Challenge to the multifamily housing sector and asked owners of those buildings to commit to a 20% portfolio-wide energy reduction over the next decade. In just the past 6 months, 62 multifamily partners have joined the Better Buildings Challenge. Each has committed to cutting that energy waste by 20% within 10 years across their entire portfolio. This commitment represents roughly 265 million square feet of building and nearly 300,000 households who would be affected. For the first time, we're setting renewable energy targets for affordable housing. Our goal is to more than triple on-site energy in federally assisted housing units to 100 megawatts by the year 2020. This represents an important opportunity to support industries of the future and help shape a healthier planet. While we're working to reduce our carbon output, we're also facing the reality that climate change is already having a negative impact on our communities. As the National Climate Assessment shows, climate change is making weather events more severe, and the things that we used to call once-in-a-generation storms are now happening every few years. The fact is, between 2011 and 2013, there were 209 federally declared disasters, major disasters. The cost in lives and infrastructure that these storms and these extreme events caused is really staggering. HUD, as I mentioned, plays an important role in the long-term recovery of areas struck by natural disasters. That's why we're using federal dollars and new and more effective ways to build and rebuild communities to be more resilient. I want to talk specifically about our work following Hurricane Sandy, in particular the creation of something called the Rebuild by Design competition. After Hurricane Sandy struck, President Obama asked Secretary Donovan to chair the Hurricane Sandy task force. He was given the task of making sure all agencies of the federal government work together toward two goals. The first was to help families and businesses get back into their homes as quickly as possible. But the second was to help make sure we rebuild the region stronger, smarter, and better prepared for future storms. To meet the second goal, the task force created the Rebuild by Design competition using America Competes Authority. It was a public-private partnership that's brought together interdisciplinary teams of architects, engineers, water experts, and academics. The competition was funded through philanthropic organizations like the Rockefeller Foundation, who worked in collaboration with New York University's Institute of Public Knowledge. When the competition was announced, 148 design teams from all over the world submitted ideas for how we could safeguard the Sandy region and rebuild it stronger and more resilient. From those 148 submissions, 10 teams were chosen to come up with detailed proposals for the region. And then they engaged in this really unique process, which was not part of how we did disaster recovery for the most part. And that's by going out for several months, holding public meetings, engaging local communities, ensuring that local officials would be brought in to discussions about the design, but that local citizens would also be made more fully aware of the kind of risks their region would be facing in the future because of climate change. What the teams found were not skeptics or critics, but people who'd seen with their own eyes how climate change is making our weather more severe. Families and local officials throughout the region, regardless of what political party they belonged to, understood at a basic level that we have to do more to prepare and protect ourselves for severe weather events. So we were really proud when also on Monday, Secretary Donovan announced the 6 winning proposals of the Rebuild by Design competition and an allocation of $920 million to begin funding their implementation. All the winning proposals, and many of those that didn't win but that were still fantastic, are truly transformative, and they'll serve as blueprints for how we can safeguard not only the region affected by Sandy, but coastal communities across the country and the world. By tapping into the power of design, architects, engineers, scientists from around the world, we're making America more environmentally and economically resilient. One proposal was called the Big U, and it proposes to create a 10 to 20 foot high zone of protection along FDR Drive on the lower east side of Manhattan. It's an area that includes a Con Ed station, and it was severely flooded when Sandy struck, and it left tens of thousands of residents without any power. The Big U will help ensure that when the next storm hits, the area and its residents will be better protected. But this isn't just a berm. This is a park. It's a public amenity. It has a different character when it's in front of different neighborhoods. But it acts to shield the city against floods and stormwater, but it creates social and environmental benefits by an improved public realm. So in every case, it's part of the public realm of that neighborhood with a different character in each part of it. Another proposal is going to create a living reef of shellfish and oyster beds off the coast of Staten Island. The reef will serve as a breakwater that'll protect the coast by reducing waves and storm surge during severe storms. That'll help reduce risk, but it'll also help to revive the ecology and connect educators and local students to the shoreline, inspiring a new generation of harbor stewards in a more resilient region over time. Specifically, the living infrastructure will be paired with social resiliency frameworks in adjacent neighborhoods. Through the Billion Oyster Project and an associated network of programmed water hubs, local schools will be working with scientists, recreation, education, and others to have access to the water and to really learn about this ecosystem. These are just a couple of the examples of the kind of co-benefits we can achieve by working collaboratively. I know the conversation here is about governance, and these are really different solutions than if if the federal government had just acted, let's say, through the Corps of Engineers, who I love dearly, but to simply do flood protection, right? Communities, state and local government, academia, philanthropy, design and engineering professionals, nonprofits, and yes, the federal government all together. In a time of climate change, we need all of our infrastructure investments to do more. Let's be honest, we have not asked very much of our infrastructure. It's often been purpose-built, single-purpose infrastructure. We need it to do more. We need to spend $1 and solve several dollars worth of community problems. And that is really the challenge that's ahead of us. By investing in proposals like the ones I've described, we're going to ensure not just that the region will be safer and more resilient the next time there's a severe weather event, but it'll be more prosperous, more inclusive, and a lot of the goals and aspirations of the community, regardless of severe weather events, will be achieved and accomplished when we act to invest in communities to make them more resilient. So, thank you very much. I'd be very happy to take some questions if you'd like to ask any. I guess the one final thing I'd say is back to a culture of resilience. Investing in resilience means that that it's not just the right thing to do in a time of fiscal constraints, but it's also the right thing to do because it will save lives. So thank you for inviting me, and I want to let you know that HUD and the Obama administration are ready to partner with you and with your colleagues to create this culture of resilience that's going to be so important here in America. Thank you. Does anyone have any questions?
I'm not going to get it, but I was wondering about that $928 million.
Come to the mic because the people who are watching this from can't hear you.
That the $920 million that you mentioned, is that primarily to fund implementation, or is that actually research and further study? What's to guarantee that these things are actually going to get built? I've been working in New Jersey, and there's a lot of skepticism that these projects are going to ultimately overcome all of the bureaucratic hurdles, the municipal tapestries. And then a related question is, you mentioned that Staten Island oyster beds. A project like that I think is great, but I wonder if they're going to be doing a similar project on the Jersey side on the Raritan Bayshore, which was hit pretty much just as hard as Staten Island. Thanks.
Sure. So the question was, what is the $920 million for? It's mostly for implementation, but let's be clear, it doesn't fully implement any of the projects, but it's to get started on these projects. Other dollars are going to have to flow into these projects to get them fully implemented, but almost $1 billion is a pretty significant first step. And it's also true that not every risk that was identified in the Sandy region has been addressed through these proposals. These were some of the most innovative and effective proposals, and many of them taking a regional approach to the particular risk, to the particular recovery need. So definitely other needs remain out there, and other projects and other efforts have received separate funding to continue to go forward. But it's kind of unusual for us to have done this kind of a competition and to use this America Competes authority to really get fresh ideas in. People after a disaster are so honestly anxious, right, to return to a sense of normalcy, that sometimes the easiest thing to do is to more or less put things back just as they were, but that doesn't really do much to abate the risk that they will suffer the same kind of damage in the event of another storm. So this is really a very different approach to recovery, and something that we're very excited to be a part of.
Hi, my name is Rebecca French. I'm a AAAS fellow at the EPA and the innovation team. So this actually directly relates to what you just said. I was wondering what the future is of rebuild by design, or the rebuild by design approach, whether if it is caught on in HUD, whether it'll be this approach will be replicated in other areas in HUD, or continuing in future recovery plans. Thank you.
I think we really were excited by the quality and the number of responses that we got through this competition, but I think even more exciting was the process of working with a very broad cross-section of communities affected by Sandy. And so I think there are many aspects of the process that we went through for Rebuild by Design that we'd really like to apply in other instances, so stay tuned.
Hi, I just wanted to bring my helmet to say thank you if you were responsible indeed for that. I'm just in Washington for 1 year and I love the bike shares.
I'm so glad.
So I have a question about transportation because we've talked, I think, in earlier sessions about siloing, and you have the housing, and then there's DOT, which does transportation, and to what degree are you working together?
Well, we're actually part of a formal collaborative effort that my office helps to administer within HUD called the Partnership for Sustainable Communities. It's EPA, the U.S. Department of Transportation, and HUD, doing something very unnatural, collaborating across a whole set of issues. So it's something that really has never happened before to this degree. So we comment on each other's solicitations for when we have grant proposals that go out, right? When we have funds made available, we sit on each other's selection teams. We try to really bring together both funding sources, but also experience and issues. One of the great things about investing in transportation choices, things like streetcars and light rail and other forms of transit, is that it can be a big boost to the economy. Lots of people would like to have access to these services. The downside is that it makes things like housing prices go up. So what are the ways in which we can work together, HUD and the Department of Transportation, to try to make sure that the people who most need access to those low-cost transportation options can have them? So we work very closely with DOT. We could certainly work more closely, but we're very happy to be part of a whole series of collaborative efforts with DOT and, for that matter, with the Environmental Protection Agency.
Any more questions? Well, I guess I have one. So I'm Darshan Kaurath, the person that introduced you. I was wondering if you could draw or tell us a little bit about your experiences in DC before you joined HUD. Can you speak a little bit about the sort of the socioeconomic challenges or the challenges that socioeconomic disparities within DC pose to sort of integrative planning and ensuring a diverse community here in DC, given the sort of influx of a lot of money in this area recently?
It's a great question. It's an interesting question. It's a question you can ask in every city in America, because you are either a city that's losing population, shrinking, having a shrinking tax base and struggling to provide services, or you're trying very much to turn that around and be a growing city with a growing tax base and an ability to more systematically address the problems that you have. So most of the time that I've lived in DC, we've been that first thing. For 60 years, steadily shrinking, steadily losing tax base, steadily declining. And it was really only about 2007 or 2008 that our population began to increase and things began to turn around. And I think that was partially because we did what a lot of cities have done and need to do, which is get rid of the push factors, right? You've heard of these push factors: crime, crappy city services, if I can use the vernacular, and terrible public schools, right? Even though our demographics across the country are changing very much, so much so that in most cities, only about 20 to 22% of households have school-aged children. So almost 80% don't. People still care about how good the public schools are. They still know that if they don't have great public schools, that the kids that are suffering in those schools, if you will, are going to have very greatly diminished prospects for ever having, good employment opportunities, real opportunities for social and economic mobility. So people really care about it. So beginning to address those factors was incredibly important. But we also invested a lot in the district in things that I would call pull factors. We kind of doubled down on transportation. So we already had this great metro system, right? But that wasn't enough, right? So we needed half a dozen different types of new bus service, express bus service, circulator service. We needed to have a bike share system. Right now all across the country, 40% of all the trips taken by automobile are 3 miles or less. It's a higher percentage of that here in the city. Those are great bicycle length trips. And bicycling is very affordable. So almost all of our transportation investments were about making transportation more accessible and more affordable. So when people began to return to the city's now growing at about 2% a year, 1,100 people a month. Most of them highly educated, because one of the things that investing in transportation did was make it a very attractive city to live in for a very particular group, and I see some of you here in the audience. Impoverished and indebted college graduates. The more degrees you have, the more money you owe in most cases, and they started coming here in droves because they could live here without an automobile and pay off their student loans much more quickly. So that also began to transform the economy, because in the most highly educated region of the country, the people moving here were much more highly educated than the regional average. Jobs now follow workers, follow talent. So companies started to come into the district that had never been here. Even though the federal government has been shrinking its employment year on year on year, our job growth has been pretty steady, right? Just about 1.1% a year. At most of it, private sector jobs that are more than making up for the loss in federal jobs. So with this new money, we've been able to invest in universal pre-kindergarten. Let's call that free all-day daycare, worth about $20,000 per household per year, enabling work for single-person heads of households, right? So we've invested in inclusionary zoning, and we recently had a proposal to not just freeze property taxes, but to eliminate them for long-time residents of moderate means. And I don't remember exactly the bond, but it's not poverty level means, but moderate means. So I think the city raised its minimum wage. I think it's doing more than most cities I can think of to try to address the issue that you raise, that part of the turnaround in population has also increased the disparity in our city. So there's a wider gap between the haves and the have-nots, but there's also much more money to invest to try to narrow that gap, and an appetite to do exactly that. So we'll have to wait and see how it goes, but there's certainly been a lot of steps taken to try to do very much that.
Right, one last question. Thank you so much.
Hi, I'm Keely, a AAAS fellow at EPA. The Rebuild by Design competition was really great because it integrated resilience and also sustainability in the solutions. What are some of the opportunities you see moving forward, and also some of the challenges for work in HUD on trying to integrate resilience and sustainability?
Well, there's a lot of opportunity. One of the things that we now have at HUD is a agency-wide resilience council, and we're working, like I'm sure all of the federal government officials are here, on a next generation adaptation plan. They're all due like any minute. Right, we've been working that crazily on them, but that has definitely unearthed a lot of opportunities to take action, because frankly a lot of our programs are at risk. And at HUD in particular, we serve the most vulnerable people in America, and HUD is 50 years old this year, but yet the patterns of settlement and poverty in the country, in many cases, way predate HUD. People with the least means lived in the land that didn't drain, next to the river that flooded a lot, and in other locations that for lots of reasons make them more vulnerable. So we have a lot of challenges ahead, but I think this idea that we need our investment dollars to do more we need to invest $1 and get many dollars worth of benefits out. That I think that has to animate what we do going forward, and that also means working with a lot of different people to understand what are the things that we can collectively achieve with these investments. Because there's no way we'll be able to meet the challenges ahead of us unless the money the HUD dollars that get spent help to address a combined sewer overflow issue that EPA might have, that help to create opportunities for low barrier to entry employment in communities, and on and on. So, thank you.